So Bernie Sanders is a socialist, right? That's what you'll hear from Fox News and different conservative outlets when describing the supposed long shot candidate Bernie Sanders. But when it comes to policy positions, Bernie Sanders actually aligns more with the American public than any news outlet is going to tell you. Now, I have here his positions on a lot of different subjects, and I'm going to go through, I'm going to tell you basically where Bernie Sanders is and where the American people are. Now, as I said, Bernie Sanders basically describes himself as a democratic socialist. Well, as far as how Americans think, only 31% of Americans react positively to the word socialism, according to a recent Pew survey. Just 50% view capitalism in favorable terms. Now, among 18 to 29-year-olds, nearly half of them had a positive view of socialism, while only 47% viewed capitalism favorably. So among the youth demographic, Bernie Sanders and the word socialism it's not a dirty word. It's not one of those things, oh my God, creeping socialism. When Republicans and conservatives make those attacks, it's ineffectual. It doesn't affect younger people in that 18 to 29 demo because they didn't live through the Red Scare like all the people who will probably vote for people who are conservative. So younger people, like what's wrong with socialism? They're doing it in Finland. They're doing it in Denmark. They're doing it in these different places in the Nordic states. So what's the issue? They seem to be happy and prosperous at the same time. What's wrong with that? That's how, a lot of people, 18, 29-year-old, feel about socialism. As far as capitalism, what we have today isn't true capitalism. I don't think you can really have something that's true, pure capitalism, right? That's sort of like having pure communism. It's not the same thing. So, what you can have, though, is a mix. And I think we do best with a mix of socialistic elements and capitalistic elements as well. Like, for example, strong safety nets along with strong property rights. And, of course, private business as well as worker-owned business, because that's what socialism means. So socialism basically means it's an economic system where workers, the people who work at the plants, own the means of production. And Germany does that with their Volkswagen plants, actually. They have to have a union, and workers sit on the board as well as executives and shareholders. And it seems to work out for Germany quite well, them being one of the more wealthy states in the European Union. So, and plus, as I was going to point out, a lot of the 18 to 29-year-olds, they haven't seen capitalism. They've seen crony capitalism, vulture capitalism, exploitive capitalism, and of course that turns a lot of people off, unless of course you're the one who's actually doing that sort of capitalism. Income taxes. So, how do people feel about taxes? Well, Bernie Sanders says his policy position is that we should not extend Bush tax cuts. He voted against the Bush tax cuts every time. He's not in favor of cutting taxes on the wealthy. He is in favor of increasing taxes on the wealthy. And according to a February poll, the majority of the American people, agree with that position. 68% of likely voters say that wealthy households do not pay their fair share, which is exactly what Bernie Sanders is saying. They need to increase their share of taxes. There's no reason that people who are the wealthiest top of American society are paying less in taxes than people who are the remaining chunk of the middle class, which continues to get smaller and smaller all the time. Now, something that the American people actually might differ on is estate taxes. Now, Bernie Sanders introduced a responsible estate tax last year, and that what it would do is it would raise the top estate tax rates and expand the tax to include estates worth more than $3.5 million. It only applies to those worth $3.5 million. more than $5.4 million. And that only, by the way, that covers 0.2% of all the states. But it's a massive windfall for very, very wealthy families, very, very wealthy estates, to be able to avoid that tax. Now, Republicans, they call that the death tax. And when you put it like that, a lot of people generally view it as unpopular. Oh my God, death tax. Well, it's because of the conservative narrative, I think, that they put on it. They call it a death tax. And they say, oh my God, they're going to tax you after you die, so your kids aren't going to get anything. In reality, it only applies to 0.2% of Americans. And I think when you point that out, people are a little bit more favorable, like, oh, yeah, I guess that's not so bad. But as I said, the results on this actually vary. But Kevin Drum of Mother Jones notes the estate tax is generally overall unpopular. I think it's, once again, it's because they don't know the specifics of this. Now, what about offshore tax havens? Well, Bernie Sanders has introduced legislation that would stop offshore tax havens by requiring American companies to pay the top corporate tax rate on profits that they hold overseas. Oh, you ain't dodging taxes. So Bernie Sanders, not in favor of corporate tax havens, is actually trying to do something about it. Now, 85% of small business owners also favor closing these overseas tax loopholes entirely, while 68% of Americans believe we should close tax loopholes for large corporations that ship jobs overseas. So a lot of small businesses, because these small businesses can't take advantage of these loopholes, of these offshore tax havens to be able to hoard their money. So they're like, hey, that's not fair that Walmart can do this. It's not fair that these large corporations can do it, that McDonald's can do it, but we can't. We're a small business. So this is something that favors large corporations over small businesses. And of course, most of Americans do agree that this is a bad thing, that they should close these loopholes. So what about campaign finance reform? Well, Bernie Sanders is in favor of a constitutional amendment that would prevent corporations from making political donations and supports public funding for elections. Overturning Citizens United, the disastrous McCutcheon ruling, get rid of all of that, publicly finance elections. I think that's the way to go. I really think we should go further and do the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. Just completely eliminate all money from politics except for publicly financed campaigns. So that's the way to go. And most Americans agree. Now, most Americans believe that corporations should have some limited right to make political donations. I disagree with that. However, in a 2013 Gallup poll, half of respondents said they would personally vote for banning all political donations from individuals and private groups and shifting to government-funded campaign finance system, and about 44% would oppose such a law. So, a little bit of a difference here. But altogether, I think a lot of people still know that giving money to politics, as much as we're doing right now, as much as big corporations and very, very wealthy donors are influencing the political system, Americans at least want to reduce that influence, much less get rid of most of it. Well, what about climate change? Well, Sanders had co-sponsored the 2013 Climate Protection Act, which would tax carbon and methane emissions and rebate 3/5 of the revenue to the people. So, taxing the polluters and giving back that money. I think that sounds great. 64% of Americans also think at least part of that's great. They strongly or somewhat favor regulating greenhouse gas emissions from power plants, factories, and cars, and requiring utilities to generate more power from low carbon sources, renewable energy. Now, where more Americans disagree is only 34% of them support a carbon tax with a $500 rebate. Once again, I think that has to go with conservative messaging. But regardless. Healthcare. Well, Bernie Sanders for Medicare for all. Americans also agree. A single-payer healthcare system, over 50% of likely voters in a poll taken in January support a single-payer system. So there's that. What about regulating Wall Street? Well, as I recently reported, Sanders wants to break up the big banks. I think that's a great idea. If they're too big to jail, or if they're too big to fail, then they're too big to exist. And a recent poll by the Progressive Change Institute found that 58% of Americans or likely voters support breaking up big banks like Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, etc. On education, he introduced legislation to make public tuition free in the United States. Public college tuition, you want to go to college? Paid for. Paid for by who? Higher taxes on the rich. Sounds like a good plan. Well, 63% of likely voters would have supported President Obama's proposal to offer qualifying students 2 free years of community college. However, as far as the recent bill to make all college free, no polls have come out yet. So we'll have to wait on seeing how Americans feel about completely free college. Now, trade, Sanders, definitely against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Heard him talk about that before. As far as fellow Americans, 62% of voters oppose fast-track authority for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but fewer Americans oppose the agreement itself, probably because we don't know what's in it. You can't really make an informed decision if you don't really know what's in the bill. A 2014 Pew poll put support for the TPP among Americans at 55%. Hopefully that will continue to erode. Pay equity for women. Sanders supports a federal law mandating equal pay for equal work. Most Americans agree that women face some sort of pay discrimination, but only about 1/3 favor addressing the problem with legislation. Wages. Bernie Sanders wants to support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour over the next few years. 63% of Americans support raising the minimum wage to $15 by 2020. So there's a lot of support there. Unions, of course. Sanders supports legislation allowing workers to form a union by signing pledge cards. And of course, Americans in 2009 said yes, that would be 53% said yes, we would favor a new law that would make it easier for labor unions to organize workers. So that's in 2009. That's the latest poll on that one. Bernie Sanders, of course, is in favor of expanding Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and nutrition programs. Now, some polls have found that the majority of voters want to expand Social Security. And even red states, polls taken in red states, show that they want to expand Medicaid. So the American people on most issues are very much with the so-called socialist. So what does that make us as Americans who support Bernie Sanders and who support these programs? It actually makes us in line with progressive values. It just shows and underscores how most of Americans, when you break things down issue by issue, are much more progressive than the Republicans and conservatives, who I don't think are all that conservative, tend to make us out to be.